The fall of 2024 painted the leaves of Boston's century-old oak trees golden when Carmen Rodriguez, at 91, made a decision that would change not only her life, but the fate of thousands of people. On that October morning, as she looked out the window of her apartment in the exclusive Back Bay neighborhood, she decided it was time to return to the streets, not as the powerful executive she once was, but as a simple bus passenger. Carmen was no ordinary woman. Over the course of 40 years, she had built Metro Trans from scratch, transforming a small 3-bus company she inherited from her father into one of the largest public transportation companies on the East Coast. Her story was legendary in business circles. A young Mexican immigrant who arrived in Boston at the age of 22, speaking broken English, and went on to become one of the most influential women in the city. When she sold the company 15 years earlier, at the age of 76, Carmen discreetly retained 30% of the shares through an investment fund managed by her niece, the brilliant lawyer Patricia Rodriguez Chen. What no one knew, not even her nephew Michael Rodriguez, the current CEO of Metrotrans, was that Carmen had never really left the company she created. Widowed for 8 years, since losing Roberto, her husband and business partner, Carmen lived alone in an elegant apartment overlooking the Charles River. Her only companions were Elena Martinez, her 67-year-old Puerto Rican housekeeper, and Dr. Samuel Goldstein, her 72-year-old personal physician, who had become one of her few true friends after her retirement. "Señora Carmen," Elena would always say, concerned, "you should get out more, meet people your own age." But Carmen had isolated herself from Boston's social scene. Her former friends in the business elite saw her as a relic of the past, and she had grown tired of the superficial conversations at exclusive clubs. She missed the real world, the contact with ordinary people who used the services she had created. It was during a doctor's appointment that Dr. Goldstein planted the seed that would change everything. "Carmen, you're physically healthy but emotionally isolated," he said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed her test results. "You need to start living again, not just existing." "Sam, what does a man my age do to feel useful again?" "You go back to basics. Remember why you started Metrotrans." Carmen smiled for the first time in weeks. "Because I wanted people like my mother to be able to get around the city with dignity." 3 days later, Carmen did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She took a public bus. She chose the 39, which connected Back Bay to Jamaica Plain, the same route she had personally designed in 1987, thinking of connecting affluent neighborhoods to working-class communities. Dressed in her navy blue wool coat, black Oxford shoes, and a leather bag she had carried for 20 years, Carmen approached the bus stop on Massachusetts Avenue. As she waited, she watched the other passengers, a young Latina nurse finishing her night shift, an elderly African-American man with a cane, students from Berklee College of Music with instruments on their backs. "This is my legacy," she thought. "These people who can come and go with dignity." That was when she met Marcus Thompson. Marcus Thompson, 45, was a Metrotrans veteran with 20 years of service. A white man of average height, his face bore the marks of 2 decades of accumulated bitterness. He'd started out as an idealistic driver, but life had made him cynical. Divorced for 5 years, Marcus paid child support for 2 teenage children who barely spoke to him. His ex-wife Jennifer had married a successful doctor, and their children now lived in Wellesley, one of Boston's wealthiest suburbs. This had created a deep anger in him toward anyone who represented privilege or status. Marcus had developed a particular dislike for elderly passengers, especially well-dressed women. To him, they represented everything he had never been able to achieve: financial security, social respect, dignity in old age. When Carmen boarded his bus that October morning, Marcus immediately noticed what he called signs of privilege: the good quality coat, the upright posture, the polite way she greeted him. "Good morning," Carmen said, carefully counting out her fare. Marcus merely grunted in response. When she headed for a seat, he accelerated abruptly, causing her to lose her balance. "Sorry," he lied, watching in the rearview mirror as she held onto the handrail. But something about Carmen's reaction surprised him. Instead of complaining or looking humiliated, she simply composed herself with a dignity that irritated him deeply. This woman would not be intimidated, and that bothered him. Marcus wasn't alone in his bitterness. Over the years, he had gathered a group of equally resentful drivers. There was Tony Salvatore, a 52-year-old Italian-American who blamed passengers for all the problems in his failed life. There was also David Kim, a 38-year-old Korean-American who, despite being younger, shared the same anger toward the world. Together, they had created a Telegram group called Bus Troubles, where they shared stories of passengers who annoyed them. Gradually, the group evolved into something darker, a network for the systematic humiliation of vulnerable passengers. "Look at this one." Marcus posted a photo of Carmen holding onto the handrail. "Queen of Back Bay, all stuck up, thinking the bus is hers." "Give her a kick," Tony replied. "I already did, but the old lady is stubborn, she won't give up." David suggested, "Slam the door in her face a few times. That always works." Over the next few weeks, Carmen continued to take the same bus at the same time. She had established a routine. She took the bus at 10:30 a.m. to go to the medical center where she had physical therapy, then went to the market in the North End and returned at 3:30 p.m. Marcus began to map out her schedule and developed increasingly cruel tactics. First, he would slam on the brakes when she was moving. Then he started closing the doors on purpose when he saw her approaching the stop. "Sorry, ma'am, I didn't see you," he would lie with a cynical smile as she knocked on the closed door. Carmen, who had faced tense union negotiations, financial crises that nearly bankrupted her company, and corporate prejudice against Latina women, began to feel something she hadn't experienced in decades: systematic and gratuitous humiliation. But her combative nature, tempered by years of leadership in a male-dominated world, would not let her give up. Each humiliation only strengthened her determination to understand what was happening at her former company. Elena Martinez, Carmen's housekeeper, began to notice changes in her employer's behavior. Carmen would come home wet, frustrated, sometimes with small bruises from falls on the bus. "Senora Carmen, what's going on?" Elena asked one afternoon, seeing Carmen arrive with dirty clothes. "Nothing important, Elena, just some rude drivers." But Elena, who had worked for Carmen for 15 years, knew her boss well. She decided to discreetly follow Carmen on one of her bus routes. What Elena saw shocked her. She watched Marcus deliberately slam the doors in Carmen's face and saw the humiliation on the face of the woman she had always admired for her strength and dignity. "This can't go on," Elena muttered to herself. "These people don't know who they're messing with." It was on a rainy November afternoon that Carmen met James Mitchell, a 55-year-old African-American driver who had worked for Metrotrans for 15 years. James had started out as a mechanic and became a driver after completing a night course. When Carmen got on James's bus expecting the usual hostile treatment, she was surprised by his genuine courtesy. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Watch the step. It's wet," James said, waiting patiently for her to settle in before driving off. During the trip, James noticed that Carmen seemed tense, constantly glancing at the door as if expecting trouble. "First time on this line, ma'am?" he asked politely. "No. I take the bus regularly, but not all drivers are as kind as you." James frowned. "I'm sorry to hear that. Part of our job is to treat everyone with respect." Carmen smiled for the first time in weeks. "You must know Marcus Thompson from the 39. James's expression changed immediately. "Ah, Marcus. Yes, I know him. He has a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" James hesitated, but something in Carmen's quiet dignity made him speak. "Look, ma'am, I shouldn't be saying this, but Marcus has problems with elderly passengers. There have been complaints." "And what happens with those complaints?" "Unfortunately, not much. Marcus has a supervisor who protects him, plus he documents everything, always has an excuse." Carmen absorbed this information with growing interest. "What do you mean he documents everything?" "He films situations, takes pictures. He says it's to protect himself from false accusations, but a lot of people think he uses it to get away with things." December 15th, 2024, would be remembered by Carmen as the moment when everything changed. A winter storm hit Boston with brutal force, and she had promised her 7-year-old great-granddaughter Emma that she would be at her piano recital at school in Brookline. Emma was the light of Carmen's life. The daughter of Sarah, Carmen's granddaughter, the girl had inherited the musical talent of her great-grandfather Roberto. Carmen never missed one of the little girl's performances. When she reached the bus stop, Carmen was already soaked by the freezing rain. The first bus on the 39 line approached through the curtain of snow. She waved to Marcus, who saw her perfectly through the wet windshield. Marcus looked directly at her. For a moment, Carmen thought she saw a flash of humanity in his eyes. But then he smiled, a cruel, calculated smile, and sped up, passing right by the stop and splashing Carmen with dirty water from the gutter. "Son of a bitch," Carmen muttered in Spanish, one of the few times she had used profanity in decades. She stood there, shivering with cold and humiliation, for over 2 hours. 3 more buses passed, but none stopped. Carmen began to suspect that Marcus had coordinated with other drivers to ignore her. When Carmen was on the verge of hypothermia, a bus finally stopped. It was James Mitchell, who had changed his route to cover for a sick colleague. "My God, ma'am!" James jumped out of the bus and ran to help her. "How long have you been here?" 2 hours, Carmen muttered, barely able to speak. James helped her onto the bus, turned the heater up high, and gave her his own jacket. "I'll take you straight to the hospital." "No, please, I need to get to my great-granddaughter's school. It's important." James looked at her with admiration. "Ma'am, you are the most determined person I've ever met." During the drive to Brookline, Carmen told James about the months of humiliation. He listened silently, his indignation growing with every detail. "This isn't just cruelty," James said. "It's systematic, organized." "What do you mean?" 3 buses drove right past you. "That's not a coincidence. Someone coordinated that." Carmen arrived at the school 40 minutes late. Emma had already introduced herself, and Sarah was desperate, thinking something had happened to her grandmother. "Abuela!" Emma ran to hug Carmen, who was still shivering from the cold. "You missed my song." Carmen knelt down, took her great-granddaughter's small hands, and looked into the girl's eyes. "I'm sorry, mi amor. Abuela had some trouble with some bad people." Sarah looked at her grandmother, who was soaked and shivering. "Let's go to the hospital now." While Carmen recovered from mild hypothermia at Massachusetts General Hospital, she asked her niece, Patricia, to conduct a discreet investigation into Marcus Thompson and his associates. Patricia Rodriguez Chen, one of Boston's most respected corporate lawyers, initially thought her aunt was exaggerating. But when she began investigating, she uncovered a web of corruption that went far beyond simple mistreatment of passengers. "Auntie," Patricia said, visiting Carmen in the hospital, "what we've found is criminal. Literally." Patricia had hired a private investigation firm that discovered that Marcus and his group not only humiliated elderly passengers, but also operated a complex fraud scheme. They siphoned fuel from buses and sold it to private companies. They falsified maintenance reports, putting lives at risk. They extorted money from vulnerable passengers, especially immigrants. They manipulated schedules to justify false overtime. They sold information about routes and schedules to competitors. The Telegram group, which Patricia managed to infiltrate through an undercover detective, wasn't just for humiliating the elderly. It was where they coordinated all their criminal activities. "They documented everything," Patricia said, showing print screens of the conversations. "They thought they were safe because they saw you as a helpless old woman." Carmen looked at the evidence with a smile Patricia hadn't seen in years. They don't know who they're messing with. As she recovered, Carmen began to assemble a support network that included some surprising people. James Mitchell offered to testify about Marcus's behavior. Elena Martinez, the housekeeper, revealed that she had discreetly documented all of Carmen's arrivals, including photos of her dirty clothes and bruises. Dr. Samuel Goldstein, Carmen's personal physician, offered his medical expertise to document the effects of prolonged exposure to the cold. "Carmen, you could have died in that storm. This is attempted murder by negligence." But the most unexpected ally was Mrs. Dorothy Chen, a 78-year-old Chinese-American woman who had also been a victim of Marcus. Dorothy had been humiliated by him for months, but had never reported him for fear of retaliation. "I saw what he did to you in that storm," Dorothy said during a visit to Carmen. "I was at the bus stop across the street. He saw you, smiled, and sped up. It was deliberate." Dorothy became a crucial witness, as she had recorded several incidents in her personal diary. Michael Rodriguez, CEO of Metrotrans, learned of his aunt's hospitalization from Sarah, who called him concerned and asked if the company offered any kind of insurance for passengers who had been victimized. "What kind of victimization?" Michael asked, confused. When Sarah told him the story, Michael was shocked. "Wait, are you saying that Aunt Carmen was taking public transportation? For months? She didn't tell you?" "No, I thought she used a private driver, or at most a taxi." Michael immediately went to the hospital to visit Carmen. "Auntie, Why didn't you tell me you were using public transportation? Carmen looked at her nephew with an expression he remembered from his childhood when she scolded him for some mischief. Because you needed to know how our company treats people like me. Our company? Michael, I'm still the largest individual shareholder in Metrotrans. That company is still my responsibility. Michael turned pale. He had taken over the company 5 years earlier, after his father's death, but he had always seen Carmen as a distant figure, a retired founder who deserved respect but not interference. You're investigating our own company? I'm investigating what our company has become, and what I've discovered deeply embarrasses me. Carmen, Patricia, and Michael spent the next week developing a comprehensive legal strategy. Patricia brought her expertise in corporate law, while Michael provided access to the company's internal systems. We don't just want to punish Marcus and his group, Carmen explained. We want to make sure this never happens to any passenger again. They discovered that the corruption network involved not only drivers, but also 3 supervisors and a regional manager. The scheme had siphoned more than $2 million from the company over 5 years. That explains why our profit margin was falling, said Michael, analyzing the financial reports. They were literally stealing fuel. Carmen decided that the revelation would be made during the quarterly shareholders' meeting in January. I want everyone to see what happens when we lose sight of our core values. Meanwhile, the detectives hired by Patricia continued to document the crimes. Disguised as ordinary passengers, they recorded situations of abuse, extortion, and negligence on HD video. One of the detectives, a 45-year-old Latino man named Roberto Silva, posed as an illegal immigrant. Marcus and his group tried to extort $50 a week from him, threatening to cause trouble if he didn't pay. They record everything, Roberto reported to Patricia. They have a system. First they humiliate you, then they offer protection in exchange for money. Another detective, a 60-year-old African-American woman named Grace Washington, documented how the group treated elderly passengers of different ethnicities. They're worse with Latina and Asian women, she reported. They seem to think they're more vulnerable. The Metrotrans shareholders meeting on January 23, 2025, began like any other. Michael presented the quarterly financial results, which showed a slight decline in profitability. We've faced some operational challenges, Michael explained, but we believe they are temporary. That's when Carmen stood up at the back of the auditorium. At 91, wearing an impeccable navy blue suit, she commanded the attention of everyone in the room. I'd like to address those operational challenges, she said in a clear, firm voice. A murmur rippled through the auditorium. Many of the younger shareholders did not recognize her, but the veterans knew exactly who she was. I am Carmen Rodriguez, founder of Metrotrans and still its largest individual shareholder, she continued, and over the past 4 months, I have conducted a personal investigation into how our company treats its most vulnerable passengers. The auditorium was completely silent. Michael was pale, knowing what was coming next. Carmen then told the whole story, from the early humiliations to the discovery of the criminal network. When she finished, she presented the video evidence, including the recording of her own humiliation in the December storm. This man, she said, showing a photo of Marcus, did not just try to humiliate me. He stole from our company, put lives at risk, and turned public transportation into an instrument of oppression. The official investigation that followed was swift and relentless. With the evidence gathered by Patricia's detectives, the FBI obtained search warrants for the homes of everyone involved. Marcus was arrested at his home one February morning in front of his ex-wife, Jennifer, who had come to pick up their children. TV cameras, leaked by an anonymous source, captured the moment he was led away in handcuffs. I didn't know she owned the company, he told his public defender. I thought she was just a rich old woman who liked to complain. You took on Carmen Rodriguez, the lawyer replied, shaking his head. The woman who built one of the largest public transportation empires in New England. You didn't stand a chance. The charges against Marcus included racketeering, theft, extortion, fraud, and endangering lives. The federal prosecutor, inspired by Carmen's courage, decided to make an example of the case. Marcus's arrest triggered a series of consequences that affected his entire network. Tony Salvatore was arrested. While trying to flee to Italy with $200,000 in cash, David Kim turned himself in and decided to cooperate with the authorities. The 3 supervisors who protected the group were fired and prosecuted. The regional manager was arrested for accepting bribes to ignore falsified maintenance reports. Jennifer Thompson, Marcus's ex-wife, requested a name change for herself and her children. "My children don't deserve to carry this shame," she said in an interview with the Boston Globe. Marcus's children, Kevin and Ashley, both teenagers, were brutally bullied at school. Ashley, 16, had to be admitted to a psychiatric clinic after a suicide attempt. "He not only destroyed his own life," commented Dr. Goldstein, "but he ruined his entire family." Under the direct supervision of Carmen, who temporarily resumed an active role in the company, Metrotrans implemented revolutionary changes. The Dignity First program included artificial intelligence cameras capable of detecting abusive situations, mandatory monthly training on diversity and respect, a 24-hour ombudsman hotline connected directly to Carmen, an incentive program for drivers who demonstrated excellence in customer service, special seats for seniors with improved ergonomics, improved air conditioning on all buses. James Mitchell was promoted to Director of Training, earning 3 times his previous salary. "Donna Carmen taught me that kindness is not weakness," he said during the inauguration ceremony. Dorothy Chen was hired as a consultant, specializing in senior citizens' rights. "I never thought that at 78 I would start a new career," she said, laughing. Marcus Thompson's trial became one of the most closely watched in Boston history. Carmen testified with a dignity that impressed even the most seasoned prosecutors. "Mr. Thompson," she said, looking directly at the defendant, "you thought you were humiliating a vulnerable old lady. In fact, you were attacking the fundamental values that built this city: respect, dignity, and compassion for the most vulnerable." Marcus, who had lost 15 pounds in prison and looked 10 years older, began to cry during the testimony. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know who you were." "It didn't matter who I was," Carmen replied. "It mattered who you were. And you chose to be cruel." Federal prosecutor Linda Chen, no relation to Dorothy, presented evidence that Marcus had victimized at least 47 elderly passengers over 2 years. "This was not an isolated case of bad behavior," she said in her closing argument. "It was a systematic campaign of psychological terrorism against the most vulnerable members of our society." Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for racketeering, theft, extortion, and endangering lives. Tony Salvatore received 8 years, David Kim 3 years for cooperating with the authorities. All were ordered to pay millions in damages. Marcus lost his home, car, pension, and all his savings. His ex-wife had to sell their house in Wellesley to pay off legal debts. "Justice has been served," Carmen said after the sentencing, "but the real test will be whether we can prevent this from happening again." 2 years later, Metrotrans became a national model of excellence in public transportation. The Dignity First program was adopted by transportation systems in 23 states. Carmen continued to ride the bus every day, now at the age of 93. She was greeted respectfully by all the employees, but more importantly, she saw how other seniors were treated with dignity. Her story became a Netflix documentary, The Bus Rider's Justice, which won an Emmy for Best Documentary. Carmen donated all the money from the rights to a fund that provides free transportation for seniors in financial need. On an autumn afternoon, exactly 3 years after her first encounter with Marcus, Carmen sat on the same bus seat where it all began. Next to her, an 85-year-old Guatemalan woman chatted animatedly with the driver, who treated her with genuine affection. Carmen smiled discreetly. The battle had not been just for her personal dignity, but for the dignity of all the elderly people who would come after her. "They thought I was just an old lady on the bus," she murmured to herself, watching Boston pass by the window. "They found out I was the queen of the road." Marcus Thompson is serving his sentence in a federal prison in Massachusetts. His children changed their names and moved to Oregon. They have never visited their father. He works in the prison laundry for 50 cents an hour and receives an occasional letter from his ex-wife, who remarried and rebuilt her life. Every morning when Carmen gets on the number 39 bus, she is not just a passenger. She is a living reminder that respect and dignity are not privileges of youth, but rights of all human beings. Metrotrans has become more than a transportation company. It has become a symbol that it is never too late to fight for what you believe in, and that underestimating an elderly person can be the biggest mistake of your life.